Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to A Bit of Advice on Air. Today we are here with Chuck Peavey. We have a great show for you prepared today. And so we are A Bit of Advice. We have 100,000 likes on Facebook. And we're also on successradio.org. And we are live on Twitch, YouTube, and on Facebook. I'm Joshua Birdsell, a young entrepreneur from Alabama. And I came out here and started my own business, and I've been on this show for a few months now, and it's really grown a lot. And I'm really thankful for all of our guests and all the advice that we've been able to pull together and learn for all of our young entrepreneurs and business owners of the future. So I want to introduce my guest today. We have Chuck Peavey, and he is right here on Skype with us today. So, hey, Chuck, how you doing? If you don't mind, give us a little bit of a introduction, a little bit of a bio about yourself.
Hey, Joshua, nice to talk to you today. You bet. So originally, I learned electronics in the United States Navy. Rallied that into becoming a software engineer. I wrote video games for a while. Started my own business doing website development and business consulting, and now, as part of my consulting work, I'm the executive director for the Business Environmental Coalition.
Awesome. That sounds awesome, man. So, as a business consultant, what do you specialize in?
So, my specialty is business turnaround. Are you familiar with what that term means?
No, go ahead. Tell me what that means, because I'm not familiar with that.
So, if you have a business that's like really in trouble, I call it bleeding money. My job is to come in, find out why it's in trouble, and stop the bleeding as quickly as possible.
When you say bleeding, what do you mean by bleeding?
So let's say that you have a business that's just, okay, so I had a client, for example, that lost 30% of revenue per year for 3 years in a row.
Oh, wow.
Okay, that's bleeding.
Oh, okay, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, you're bleeding. You're about to die. You're bleeding out.
Exactly.
Okay, so that makes sense.
I personally call it business triage. So what I do is I come in, I assess what's going on, and I come up with solutions that will stop the bleeding and then help turn the business around so it becomes more successful as it moves forward.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. That's pretty cool. So what is Business Environmental Coalition, and how did this idea get started for you? I see you're a co-founder.
The Business Environmental Coalition actually goes back to about 1989. That was when an organization, the South Bay Business Environmental Coalition, was created by Jaime Lozano and a few other people. What happened, I hope this isn't too dry, California passed SB 939, which is the reduction of waste bill. Mm-hmm. And all the cities in the southern Los Angeles area, South Bay area, contacted the big businesses there, Xerox, Northrop, and they said, okay, so we have to cap waste going to the landfill, and we have to reduce it by 50% over the next 5 years. So our first decision is no business in this region is going to be allowed to increase production beyond 1990 levels.
Oh, wow.
In other words, if you're a car manufacturer and you make 100 cars a year, or if you made 100 cars in 1990, you're not allowed to make 101 in 1991.
Oh my God, that's ridiculous. Why would that? What? That didn't even make sense.
Well, this is the way that cities and bureaucrats think. They don't work in the business sector. They don't understand how businesses work. So Jaime got a group of other business people together, and he's representing Northrop at the time. And he got a handful of people together. They created this organization, and they went to the cities and they said, look, the problem is you need to reduce waste, right? And the cities are like, sure. And he goes, how about you let us help you do that? So we as businesses will find ways to reduce our waste stream to help you in your goals.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
And then we can keep growing, which is what businesses do, and you can meet your goals and objectives. And he was highly effective at that. In fact, so much so that the city of Carson, who had actually gone negative. So the goal by 2000 was to reduce waste by 50%. By 1995, they had increased their waste by to 147%.
Wow.
So
it's a pretty big deal, and it was needed at the time.
well, when you think about, when people talk about the environment and they talk about like beach cleanups or fines or, for plastic bags or whatever, what people don't understand is it all comes down to the trash that's going to the landfill.
Right.
And that's not as sexy as hanging out on the beach with a bunch of attractive people collecting cigarette butts, but it's where the job really needs to be taken on. So,
how did that tie in to the start of Universal Net that you started?
So Universal Net was completely separate. I hadn't even met Jaime by that point. I was looking for a career change, and websites just seemed like an interesting place to go. I get bored easy. I'll just say it flat out. I'm not the kind of guy who just builds like a little website that's pretty and has a menu on it. I need to build something that's more intense. So
right.
I was taking on clients like a company called Financial Service Centers Cooperative. They organize shared branching between all the credit unions in the nation. And we were keeping track of all their locations and all that kind of stuff. We were organizing the files that were shared between the credit unions, and all posting this online in 1999 and 2000, before anybody was doing stuff like that.
Right.
For the Irvine Public Schools Foundation, we built a website that they use to manage their after-school program and their summer school program, where parents could register their students. We were working with, I think it's 27 schools in the district, 35,000 children.
Wow.
And we managed all that.
So that's what Universal Net was. You were building websites for pretty big names.
Right.
Okay.
We also did Orange County Fire Authority, for example, was one of ours.
And you started that, correct?
I did.
Awesome. So what is the biggest concern with environmental issues in the business world, since you've got a lot of experience in the business world?
So there's two different points of view I have on this. There's my personal thing is about plastic in the ocean. But for business people in general, in fact, anybody who's doing business or lives in California, something that we need to be paying attention to is a new law that was passed in 2016, SB 1383. Now, you may have heard of this. When it was passed, the media was joking about it. It was the cow fart law. Wow. The state of California was going to regulate cow farts, cow flatulence. And
how do they do that?
Yeah, well, they actually have, and I'm not kidding you. They've designed a device that can mount on a cow's back, and they cut a hole in the side of the cow's stomach and put it in there to collect the methane coming out of the cow.
Oh, my God.
And they expect that to be placed on cows all over the state of California. But that's not the worst of it. What people don't know is that it changes the rules around all of the environmental laws in California, so they're now mandates and they have fines attached.
Wow.
So, for example, and this goes into effect, by the way, January 1st, 2022. So, for example, if you live in a house and you accidentally throw an apple peel in your trash, because by January 1st, 2022, you will be required by law to have a composting program. If you don't have a composting program, there's a fine attached. But let's say you drop an apple core in your trash. The municipality that you live in is required by law to inspect everybody's trash on an ongoing basis. It's a spot check. They'll walk down your street this week, next week they'll walk down another street. Now, if they find an infraction like that apple core, it's a $500 fine per instance.
Wow. That's ridiculous. And when is this? You said this is taking place in January, and is this happening in Southern California?
All of California.
All of California. That is ridiculous. So what is some advice that you can give that can help somebody in that?
So one of the things that we're doing at the Business Environmental Coalition is we're digging into this, and we're kind of defining standards for how to avoid these fines. We're working with some of the larger corporations in California, and we're coming up with a plan to help small businesses as well. So what you need to do is you need to actually read and study the law, and you need to modify the way that you manage waste in your business so that you don't have to, so that you won't be caught. And here's the thing. No good faith effort will be recognized. The old laws, 939 and 1826, which is the organic waste laws, those said, hey, you know, if you've got a good faith effort, we're not going to fine you. But this one eliminates the good faith effort. It says you have to get fined no matter what. And by the way, if you are not fined, like if the inspector finds it, the city inspector finds it and he doesn't fine you, and the state finds out, the city gets fined $10,000 per day until they do fine you.
Wow. So even if you've moved here recently, like from out of town, because I know me, when I first moved here, because I moved from Alabama, and I've been here coming up on 2 years, and I mean, I seen 3 trash cans. You know what I'm saying? Like I was like 3 trash cans to fill up, you know? So I was filling them up, and then my brother told me, he was like, hey, you can't do that. This is for recycling. This is for yard waste. This is for, and I was like, I just thought when one got full that you just fill the other one up, you know? And so what happens if something like that happens? I mean, and you're saying so they don't even have a good faith, so you can't even be like, oh, I just moved here, you know, there's no excuses. No. You're screwed, basically.
I joke with people because the thing is I'm not sure. So the law was just, they just finished the informal hearings on May 16th. I was listening to those last couple of hearings, and even the municipalities are freaking out. There was a mayor of one city who said, hey, you know, as soon as we start finding these people, they're not going to vote for us anymore. And Cal Recycle was like, you know what? I'm sorry, but there's nothing we can do. It's like, this is the law. That's crazy. And our job is just to enforce it. You know, you need to change the law if you want that to change. But I jokingly say, if you peel a potato into your trash and there's 20 pieces of potato skin, does that count as 1 potato skin, or does that count as 20?
Yeah, do you get fined 5 if you throw out five apple peels? Do you get 500 per apple peel or banana peel?
Oh no, yeah. When you're talking peels, that's the question. I mean, if it's 5 apple cores, that's a $2,500 fine.
Oh my God.
If you peel a potato and there's 20 pieces of peel,
oh yeah,
is that $50 or $100,000?
Oh my God.
Or is that
who justifies that? Who's the guy that's in charge of that? I mean, I feel like somebody's going to hate him, man. He's got the worst job of all. I mean, my Lord. So what is some advice that you can pull from all the business experience that we've talked about thus far, like from the business consultations that you do and the Business Environmental Coalition that you do and the Universal Net? What is some advice that you can give to a young entrepreneur that's just getting started on what gave you the motivation?
Okay, so being an entrepreneur, that's pretty, that's kind of like near and dear to my heart. It's something that I absolutely love, but it requires a certain amount of self-motivation and self-start. If you don't know something, learn it. I actually had a client who was an attorney, and she had a bookkeeper, like a CFO, so contract CFO. And this guy actually had a rubber stamp with her signature and full access to her checks.
Oh my goodness.
And I'm like, why are you doing that? I'm like, you cannot do this. You cannot give this guy unlimited access to your funds. And she goes, oh, well, I'm an attorney, and if he steals from me, then I'm going to take him to court. And she actually got angry at me for even bringing it up. She was one of my turnaround clients, and she just wasn't listening to what I had to say. So she let me know that from now on I was reporting to him, and it wasn't more than a couple of weeks before I wasn't reporting to anybody. I'd moved on. But I'd heard, I think about 8 months later, that he had cleaned her out and moved on, and she couldn't do anything about it.
Oh my goodness.
So,
So what's your advice for that?
well, my advice for that is A, write your own checks. I actually had an accountant give me that advice when I was 23 years old. He said, you never let anybody else write your checks for you. He says, you will look at every single one.
Yeah, amen to that.
And the other thing is learn to understand how your business works. Stay focused on your business. If there's something you don't understand, learn it. If you don't understand bookkeeping, get books and study bookkeeping or take seminars or something. The main thing about being an entrepreneur is it's a constant education. It's the reason why I moved on to that. You know, from being a software engineer to being an entrepreneur is so much more fun because I'm constantly reading, I'm constantly learning, I'm constantly going to another level.
That's so true. I mean, you always have to be learning when you're an entrepreneur because you're always trying to build your business or your future business that you want to start and whatever makes you happy when you're an entrepreneur, which is why I love being an entrepreneur myself.
And even if you hire somebody else to do a job, you better know that job. When I first started, I hired a guy to help build a sales department for me. And 3 months later, I realized I was out $15,000 and he hadn't done anything to help me at all.
Wow.
So I forced myself to go out and learn how to sell. And you know what? My life's better for it. And I'm a better salesman pretty much than anybody I hire.
You just got to go out there and do it.
That's right. And if you think that you can be an entrepreneur and run your own business and not do sales, think again.
Oh yeah, you got to learn some kind of sales because you got to be able to talk to your customers and be able to handle situations that come left and right. It could be a good situation or a bad situation. You
Sure.
want referrals for the good, and you need to know how to deal with the bad, whether you need to give them a refund or whatever. You need to know how to take care of that. So it's good to work for somebody too, in my personal opinion. So I'm gonna switch topics a little bit.
Okay.
I know I heard you say it earlier. So you have a personal issue with the plastic in the ocean. Can you explain that? Like what's the personal issue? I know it gets on my nerves too. I just seen a video the other day of it was like waves coming in of all the trash in some other country, and I was like, you got to be kidding me. I mean, it made me want to go out there and clean it up, but I mean, it takes a lot to do that. I'm sure, you know. So what is your personal issue with the plastic in the ocean?
I actually do presentations on this. To me, it interests me that this was the issue that got me interested in environmental things. So I mentioned that, you know, I study and I read a lot and so on, and I don't take anything for granted. So when people start talking about climate change or whatever, I go out and I research and I learn what's the reality there. And the one thing that I feel is settled about climate change is that it's not settled. A lot of people will tell you it is, but there's still a lot more science that needs to be dealt with, and we need to depoliticize that and let the scientists figure out what's going on. The one thing I learned this in 2009 is about the plastic in the ocean. So there's this guy, his name's Captain Charles Moore, did a race from the United States to Japan, and when he came back, what they'll do is they'll follow the current. So there's a current that goes around the Pacific Ocean that flows like this. I guess from your point of view, it's this way. And what they'll do is they'll catch the lower current and take that to Japan, and then they'll take the higher current that goes past Alaska to come back home. And he just decided he'd go across the middle. Well, when he went across the middle, he saw this plastic floating around there. And since then, they've checked all 5 gyres in the world, and they all have gobs of plastic in them. Now, the problem is that the media and a lot of people have built this up to look like it's big piles of plastic, it's mountains of plastic, and you could just go out there with a loader and load it on a truck, you know, on a big tender ship and take it into port, and you'd be good. But it's not. What happens is you take this water bottle here, you put it in the ocean for about 5 or 10 years, and it's going to start to break down and eventually break down into tiny pieces of plastic. If you want to see something interesting, go and Google plastic and Turn Island, Turn Island. Because this plastic breaks down into tiny particles, and the fish are eating them, the birds are eating them. And it's a real problem, but people don't see it as a problem because it's not on the surface. It's literally tiny pieces of plastic floating probably within the first 150 feet layer of the ocean.
Wow.
And it's virtually eliminated the bottom of our food chain.
Wow. I mean, and a lot of people don't know that. That's something that is not known, that's a problem. I didn't know that they were little bitty pieces. I always just thought that the water bottle, like you said, I didn't know that it broke down into a bunch of little pieces. That's kind of crazy. So what I'm gonna switch topics again because that's a very good topic to be on. But we might have to have another show another day. We're almost getting to the conclusion of our show, and there's some really good questions about gaming that I want to ask you that I've been waiting to ask you till the end of the show. So, you were talking about if you Googled, two things. So, what happens if you Google your name and Atari at the same time?
So if you Google Chuck Peavey and Atari, I have 12 published video games out there for the Atari. In fact, there was one time, I'll never forget this, my son was like 1.5. He could barely say, and we walked into a Toys R Us, and on the wall of all the Atari video games, there were like 15 of them. And at that time, 7 of them were mine. And I was pointing going, oh, yeah, your dad did this one. So I did ones that people might know. I did Loadrunner for the Atari.
Okay.
I did a game called Dark Chambers, which apparently a lot of people are still playing to this day.
That's pretty cool.
I did a Missing in Action video or game based on the Chuck Norris Missing in Action movies for the Atari 7800. And the company went bankrupt like the day before I turned in the final release.
Oh.
So there's actually a beta version of that game that's being played out there on emulators. This was the first time that I realized that anybody even knew I existed.
Wow.
Was when I saw that Missing in Action was up there. But so I experienced a lot of success back then.
That's pretty cool. So it says that in your bio that you used to write video games. What does that mean? Like you used to write them? Like did you like create the graphics, or did you just like the scheme of it, or?
No, so as a graphics artist, I made a really great software engineer.
Oh.
I was actually one of the first people who was programming video games who worked with an artist instead of doing it myself, because I really sucked at the graphics. But I could program like crazy. I mean, I worked in assembly language, basically the computer's language, and I worked on the Commodore 64 and the Atari. I worked on the Sega Genesis. That was mostly assembly languages. In fact, that was all assembly language on the Genesis. I worked on the PlayStation. That was in C programming language and some assembly language.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
So I actually would do the programming. I was what they used to call a lead programmer. They don't really have those anymore. Well, they kind of do, but back in those days, you were responsible a lot for, you were given a basic design and things like that, but you were responsible for everything else as far as gameplay and things like that. Nowadays, it's not like that. Now it's all kind of run by some committee of executives, and all the programmers report to that person. You have big, huge teams working on some kind of an engine. I worked, right as close to the metal or as close to the computers you could possibly get. I didn't have other people's code to guide me. It was all just me.
So what made you quit the video game world?
Well, I was working on a game called The X-Files for the PlayStation. It was in 1998, and I had this really cool idea that would make the game better. It was just a minor modification. It's you reach places where your code can diverge. And I reached that point and I said, hey, if I do this, it'll make the game more playable, more fun, more interesting. So I tell my producer, hey, let's do this. It'll make the game more interesting. He's like, all right, well, I'll run it by Fox. So I go and I work on some other code. I come back to him 2 days later because I hadn't heard from him. I'm like, so what's the deal? And he says, oh, well, they're having a committee meeting in three weeks and they'll decide then. I was like, well, I can't stop working for 3 weeks.
Yeah, really?
He says, well, go as if they're going to say no. I was like, all right. So I went ahead and I built all this code, 3 weeks worth of coding. They came back and they said yes. Now, without talking to a programmer at all, not only did they say yes, they said, hey, and let's throw in this feature, this feature, this feature, and this feature. And the features that they wanted couldn't be done on that platform.
Oh, man. So you had to basically start over.
So I had to throw away 3 weeks worth of code, and I still had to go back to their committee of non-programmers to let them know that some of what they wanted wasn't even possible. And that drug everything on for another 8 weeks. And I was like, you know what? When you get to the point where a coding decision is being made by a team of 15 people who've never programmed a line of code in their lives, I don't want to be part of this industry anymore.
Yeah,
and let's face it, I mean, I have 12 published games, but I've worked on 16.
Oh, wow.
4 more published. And by then I was getting burned out. So it seemed like moving to websites and business consulting. And I did go to college for business.
Oh,
I didn't go to college for programming.
So what's some advice that you can give maybe to an entrepreneur that might be looking to get in the gamer world nowadays, just based on what you know?
So I've actually been in mentor programs for teens and always around video games. I always want to talk video games. Here's what you got to know about video games. Programming them is what most people consider boring. It's not the same thing as playing a video game. If you can't sit at a computer desk for hours and hours and hours staring at numbers, looking for the one number that's wrong, you don't belong programming video games, because it has to be an obsession.
So you have to be all about numbers and organization.
Well, I'll give you an example. I made a mistake in a video game where an airplane was supposed to be red or blue, but it turned red, and I couldn't figure out why. So I spent 3 days going through line after line, like probably about 1,500 lines of code.
Oh, wow.
Before I finally found a missing pound sign. My whole game, and the reason that was a problem is because the blue plane was the good guy and the red plane was the bad guy.
Oh, man.
So I had a red plane that was the bad guy that was still red, but I had a blue plane that was magically red.
Wow.
And the difference in assembly language is if you load A000, it loads what's in that memory address. If you load pound A000, it loads that number.
Oh, wow.
So a missing pound sign, and I had to have the patience and the focus to go over and over and over nonstop for 3 days until I found that missing pound sign.
Wow, that is insane.
So if there's anybody out there who's going, oh, I'd love to do that, you're perfect for video games. And if you want to do video games, sit down and write one of your own. This is what I did. I wrote a program. I got it publishable, and I took it to a publisher, and they published it for me. And after that, the video game industry took me in. Nowadays, you could easily write a game, publish it yourself, and that would get you the recognition that you need to be able to get into the industry.
That's pretty cool. Well, we sure appreciate all your advice. So if I could get one ball of gold nugget from you, from everything that you've experienced, just one sentence for our entrepreneurs or anybody out there that's listening, what would it be?
Okay, so I have a motto I live my entire life by. If you're not having fun, you're not doing it right. And I swear to you, I mean, it sounds funny and trite, and it is, but if you take a look at that, if you're having a bad day, ask yourself, am I having fun? And if you're not, look and you'll see that there's something that you can change that'll make your life more fun and more interesting.
Awesome. So what is www.unteam.com, and how can we reach you?
So Unteam is my business consulting site. Probably the best place to reach me and the best place that people would find a lot of interesting information is at www.businessenvironmentalcoalition.org.
Okay.
So I'm spending a lot of time there.
I got you.
But both will work, and if you use the contact form on the Business Environmental Coalition website, for the time being, that comes to me.
Okay, so perfect. So is there any other way or form that they can reach you?
I'm on Twitter. What am I on Twitter as?
Chuck Peavey.
Yeah, yeah, right. At Chuck Peavey.
There you go.
So you can find me on Twitter. I've been
Facebook.
doing that for a few months, and then of course Facebook, same thing, Chuck Peavey, and LinkedIn, Chuck Peavey.
Okay, awesome. Well, Chuck, I want to thank you so much for all your advice today. We're at the closing part of our show. So right now, I just want to thank everybody for watching and joining us today. And we're going to have a great guest next week. I cannot wait, but I'm so thankful for our guest today. I learned so much great, useful information about the gaming world and about the business world and about plastic in the ocean. So I really appreciate all of your knowledge and everything that you've learned. You're a great man of success, Chuck. And I hope that we can have you on here on another show on another day, and maybe we can talk a little bit of politics and some other things that I know that you said you didn't know if you wanted to talk about on here. So maybe we can do that on the next show. So thank you, Chuck, and you have a great day, and everybody else have a great day as well. We'll
Great.
see
Well,
you
thanks
next
for
week.
having me, Joshua.
No problem. All right. See y'all next week.